decolonization, as it is often overlooked in the classroom. Sylvia has unique experiences with teaching this and in her high school classrooms, and she will be sharing her approach with us today. I will take a quick minute, probably closer to 3 or 4 minutes, to introduce myself and my organization. My name is Jessica Knapp, and I am the Online Engagement Coordinator here at Canada's History Society. And if you're not familiar with Canada's History Society, we are a national charitable organization dedicated to making Canadian history popular for a general audience. And we do this in a number of ways, including our flagship publications, Canada's History Magazine and Kayak, Canada's History Magazine for Kids. We also administer the Governor General's History Awards, which recognizes excellence in history in 5 different categories. I have provided the link here on the slide for you to access. The first link is a list of the recently announced 2014 Governor General's History Award for Excellence in Teaching recipients, as well as a link to the Government of Canada History Awards, both of which will be presented on November 3rd in Ottawa, just 2 short weeks away. I would also like to quickly draw your attention to the Canada's History Forum that will also be live streamed on November 2nd at the Canadian War Museum. So feel free to click on that link and for additional information and to register. So now to focus on the immediate present, Sylvia has prepared a presentation for us, so she will go through that, and we will have some time at the end for questions. If you could use the chat window, as we already have been, in the bottom right-hand corner to ask questions, I can help facilitate those at the end. Sylvia has also prepared a collection of additional resources for this webinar that can be accessed through the first link on this slide underneath resources for this webinar. I think there are about 4 or 5. If you haven't read them, don't worry. Sylvia is aware, and she will make references to them as needed. If you are on social media, please spread the word about our conversation tonight. I have included Canada's History's Twitter handle and Facebook link there. So comment at us and let your friends know about what's happening. We can post a recording of the webinar afterwards, and I would really appreciate your feedback on this webinar, whether you're watching it live or as a recording at a point in the future. There is a survey on our website that I will be able to email out to those who have registered afterwards. We have a couple more webinars planned for 2014, but starting in January 2015, we will be focusing on a theme, historical venues. So if you are teaching about or visiting a historical site with your students and you think there is value in sharing it with others, please contact me at jnap@canadashistory.ca and we can discuss it further. Now for a brief introduction to Sylvia Smith. For those of you who don't know, Sylvia received the Governor General's History Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2013 for her project of heart. She teaches grade 9, 10, 11, and 12 in history, native studies, English, careers, civics, geography, as well as many other subjects. She currently teaches in Ottawa at Elizabeth Wynne Wood Alternate. Welcome, Sylvia. And if you just give me a few moments, I can bring up your slide. Sylvia, you can feel free to unmute your mic, and once the presentation is loaded, you are welcome to begin.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me?
I'll just bring you to the top.
Okay. the slides, to move them forward and back, it's in the bottom left hand, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, greetings from unceded Algonquin territory, and thanks to the Algonquin people for allowing me to address all of you tonight. My name is Sylvia Smith, and my traditional ancestral territories are England on my dad's side and Germany on my mom's side. I am the granddaughter of uninvited guests to Treaty 6 area, and I guess you can see it right there. Treaty 6 area is that big swath sort of mostly in Saskatchewan and Alberta. So, getting back to Algonquin territory, this is a visual of Omauininimi territory without its colonial markings, and this is a view of Algonquin territory with its colonial markings. And this is a view of Algonquin territory from the perspective of the colonized. Canada's history has never presented a webinar on decolonization per se before, so it would be kind of interesting for me to take a look and see how many of you are familiar with the term. Can you just put either a yes or no down in your box? Okay. Warren says yes. Christine Moreland, yes. Oh, wow, this is great. So it looks like everybody sort of knows about this. Perfect. Learning good, Graham. Okay. So according to my online dictionary, it is the undoing, according to, yes, in other words, decolonization is the undoing of colonialism, where a nation establishes and maintains dependent territory. So if we just take a look, now my slides used to say have numbers on them and they don't here. So I'm just going to have to take a look and see. Okay, here we go. Under colonialism, there's a loss of political sovereignty, loss of economic self-determination, loss of culture, and genocide in many cases. If something is decolonized, in a decolonizing process, there's a gaining of political independence from a colonizing power, gaining control over resources and how to use them, and generally a revitalization and reclamation of culture. So here is a snapshot of a handout that was listed as one of the resources, and it's titled, "What's this teaching for decolonization all about?" And it lists 10 points that let you know when you understand it or when you get it. I created this as a guide for a workshop I did at the request of MEGAN, which is an indigenously led working group under the umbrella of Idle No More. Jessica has included these points at the end of the presentation, just in case you didn't get a chance to look at them beforehand, as she mentioned. So I don't know how many of you were able to listen to Ben Seashell's webinar. It was earlier on in the year, he gave one, and if you haven't, it really is excellent. It's a good precursor to this one. It introduces the concept of Eurocentrism, how it's othered Indigenous peoples, their knowledges. He actually gave an invaluable advice on how non-Indigenous teachers can teach Native studies, and in fact, how we have the responsibility of teaching and of learning the history of Aboriginal peoples in Canada. It's really good, and in fact, Ben has a blog that is well worth bookmarking. So what I'm going to do is go over some terms that it helps to know when engaging in the topic of decolonization, and it seems to me like you guys will probably know all of this, but I'm going to just go over them anyway. The first one is settler or newcomer. It's someone who is not First Nations, Inuit, or Métis. Anyone in Canada or Turtle Island whose ancestors were not originally from this land are settlers. I'm speaking not just the first or second generation of Europeans who settled here, as I was taught in elementary school. So from an Indigenous, which is a relational perspective, I am a newcomer, my ancestors having arrived on Turtle Island in the late 1700s. In addition, my rights or non-rights on this land are equivalent to someone who has just arrived in this country, whether they be a recruited Microbiologist working for Health Canada, maybe coming from England, or a refugee claimant from Sudan or Afghanistan. Okay, another word, epistemologies. Epistemologies are ways of knowing. Different worldviews espouse different epistemologies. So the Western or dominant epistemology in our culture is a Eurocentric one. I'll be using this term more than once. Ontologies. Ontologies are ways of being. Again, different worldviews espouse different ontologies. So for any philosophers who might look at this, these are terms that are part of their lexicon, but I think we need to start knowing what some of these words mean as well, especially educators. Ways of knowing and ways of being make up one's identity, how one sees and understands oneself and their people. Now, our next word or understanding is cognitive imperialism. So to use Maria Baptiste's words, and here's Maria sitting in lovely Saskatoon, cognitive imperialism is a form of cognitive manipulation used to disclaim other knowledge bases and values. Validated through one's knowledge base and empowered through public education, it has been the means by which whole groups of people have been denied existence and have had their wealth confiscated. Cognitive imperialism denies people their language and cultural integrity by maintaining the legitimacy of only one language, one culture, and one frame of reference. So, here we have a diagram representing the four interdependent aspects of a learner. I suppose most of you are probably familiar with the Cree medicine wheel. So this will look similar, but I have changed the sequence so that it'll be easier for us to visualize just how deficit the Eurocentric model of education is to a truly holistic pedagogy. And in my view, a holistic pedagogy recognizes and honors all aspects of a learner. Their cognitive functioning, I've included the terms here mental and intellectual as other descriptors for this type of learning. Their physical selves, and here we can use either body or kinesthetic, there are other descriptors as well. Their emotional selves, and I sometimes refer to this as heart knowledge, and their spiritual selves. The emotional and spiritual components of a learner are often referred to as the affective component if we use edgy jargon. And as educators, I think that we all know when that component is being engaged. So having acknowledged these four parts of the learner, I'd like to make a point and then pose a question. Now, I don't have a slide for this, but I should have. So here's the point. Maybe if you could kind of close your eyes or something and concentrate. When teachers adopt decolonizing pedagogies, they assume for the most part that the pedagogies and practices now in place in our schools and our various institutions are still primarily colonizing. They're still epistemically and ontologically violent when it comes to Indigenous peoples. In other words, with respect to education, the ways we teach what we teach are still overwhelmingly assimilatory. Many Indigenous scholars and non-Indigenous scholars would maintain that these ways we teach and what we teach are culturally genocidal as they continue to erode or kill the identity of those Indigenous learners. Mainstream education continues to be a colonizing force, and well-meaning educators, administrators, and Ministry of Education officials continue to support an assimilatory trajectory. Now, moving on, I have a screenshot here of a documentary by Carol Black called Schooling the World, The White Man's Last Burden. I can well imagine most of you have seen this, but if you haven't and you're a teacher and you really should. It really contextualizes Western education or Eurocentric education and shows us how damaging it has been as a tool of colonialism. And it iterates the impact that education, in combination with religion, and I speak here of Christianity, what this combination has had on the world, right from the Indian residential schools in North America to what's happening today in Ladakh, which is commonly referred to as Little Tibet, where the tragic loss of Indigenous knowledge is happening at breakneck speed through modern education. So when we think about worldviews and the collision course with Indigenous peoples we've been on for so long in this country regarding education, it's really important that we, newcomer teachers, understand how our worldview impacts how we teach and what we teach. And I think it's important to know how valiantly Indigenous leaders have resisted and continue to resist ongoing attempts of government to assert our colonizing approaches on them. We saw this play out politically last year when the federal government tried to pass the controversial First Nations Education Act. It was so overwhelmingly unpopular that the Grand Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Sean Atleo, resigned. And this pushback is nothing new. Indigenous peoples in Canada have been resisting state-mandated and imposed curriculum and offering solutions since the 1970s, but unfortunately the response of the state has remained at best a patronizing, "I know better," and Indigenous control of Indigenous education on reserves remains largely a platitude. The statistics concerning Aboriginal student success within mainstream academic institutions really haven't changed that much in over 40 years as well. For example, the chances of an Indigenous youth receiving a criminal record is still greater than the probability of him or her achieving a high school diploma. My second point takes the form of question. Does including the Aboriginal perspective in our history courses mean the same thing as teaching for decolonization? Generally speaking, and from what I've seen in practice, I would say no. But it should. Including the Aboriginal perspective, from what I've experienced in working with educators across the country, does mean teaching the factual, the truths of our history, and this includes the oft left out parts that put settlers in a bad light, but it is only partial. And just as an aside here, I'd like to say that it's interesting that Native studies or Aboriginal studies isn't really seen or understood as history to many teachers and students. From my experience, Canadian history is viewed almost solely as synonymous with English and French colonization of Turtle Island. So what is uniquely the Aboriginal perspective, from my point of view, is putting heart-spirit learning, authentic student-centered engagement into the learning environment, and giving it the same importance as we would the intellectual/physical aspect. In other words, it would be the other half of the circle. It is my contention that Eurocentric education systems pretend that the heart-spirit component doesn't exist. It is deemed irrelevant as it cannot be objectively evaluated or assessed by the teacher. And isn't it interesting that it is usually that heart-spirit element or the affective component that when we do hit it in our learners and in our students, that is when we know we've engaged them in an authentic and transformative way. And this is powerful stuff for both the teacher and the teacher's students. I think if there are any art or drama or dance teachers out there, certainly they'll know what I'm talking about. So going back just a bit, if curriculum is changed just to include facts about our history that we've conveniently left out in the past because we didn't think those facts were important, then what's being done ostensibly to rectify a deficit amounts to merely an add-on to a curriculum that ultimately remains Eurocentric, cognitively imperialistic, and ultimately assimilative. The drive to transform the curriculum in order to close the gap in educational achievement levels of Aboriginal learners compared to that of their non-Indigenous counterparts remains a failure, especially in provinces like Ontario, where we've had a mandate since 2007 to include the Aboriginal perspective in all aspects of curriculum, from junior kindergarten right up and through colleges and universities. Tell me, what government can initiate something as seemingly progressive as this, and in the same breath, continue to promote and uphold standardized testing? Again, we see the epistemic violence and the contradiction in terms of this kind of unrolling of curriculum. So instead of using phrases like including the Aboriginal perspective or teaching the Aboriginal perspective, I'd like to talk about embedding the Aboriginal perspective. Embedding the Aboriginal perspective, in my mind, means adopting a decolonizing pedagogy. So how does a settler teacher do this without appropriating? Or is it even possible for a settler teacher to do this? Does this mean that as a newcomer, we have to start doing smudging ceremonies in our classrooms? Well, the first thing I want to tell you is yes, a settler can use decolonizing methodologies and pedagogies in the classroom, and no, it does not mean that you have to do this by appropriating Indigenous ceremonies or traditions. One does this by taking what they have learned, which is the truthful material, the factual material, understanding how it relates to them as individuals, in other words, they see its personal relevance, and then act on that knowledge that has been emotionally processed. In other words, they move the knowledge from theory, where we in the Eurocentrism of our schools like to leave it, into the kinesthetic realm, into action, where it enters the political sphere, thereby becoming transformative. Students become change makers through participating in what it means to be responsible and respectful citizens. So I'm going to sum up some of what I've been talking about into a few points, just to illustrate more fully how we can teach history or really any other subject matter to decolonize. The first thing we do is teach a truthful history. No whitewashing. How many history teachers talk about the massive loss of lives of children during the era of the Indian residential schools? The history text I teach from, which is still authorized by our Ministry of Education, has 63 words in it about Indian residential schools. 63 words in a text that has 450 pages in it. Bring in an IRS survivor to speak the truth of what living through that experience was like. Also, reading the work of Indigenous educators, Indigenous scholars and writers will help a teacher to unlearn much of what we've been taught. Racist perspectives that have been handed down to us generation after generation unchallenged. Taiage Alfred's work, or Maria Batiste, Thomas King, Richard Wagamese, Lee Miracle, Janice Acus. Reading Indigenous literature will provide the reframing of context that teachers will need before we're comfortable teaching from this new place. Assigning more weight to the affective component of the student's learning so that a personal connection, an emotional connection with the material being learned, will empower and energize both the students and the teacher. This is where reciprocity happens. Both the learners and the teachers become co-creators of knowledge. Power becomes a collectively shared experience in the learning environment. Connecting the emotions with what's being learned is what I call heart-spirit learning. And I came across an explanation of spirituality which I'd like to share with you, as articulated by an Indigenous academic in the Education Department at the University of Regina. Dr. Blair Stonechild says spiritual development is not religious education and does not involve inculcation into any one religious, spiritual, or secular set of beliefs. The central aim of spiritual development is the cultivation of inner strength, along with the development of an outward focus of care, compassion, and respect. The needs of the spirit are recognized as part of the development of whole persons. So bring elders or cultural workers into the school as often as you are able, and use the great outdoors as your classroom any chance you can get. For example, before heading out on a field trip, request that an Indigenous elder from whatever territory you reside on speak to the class. It doesn't matter whether it's an outdoor ed trip or a science trip. Learn a teaching from the land that you're on, literally. And after you get back to school, commit to doing a justice piece. For example, if you're a teacher in Kenora, and the trip is a Phys Ed 1, maybe an outdoor ed trip, you've been on the traditional territory of the Ojibwa, Grassy Narrows First Nation. You can join the Grassy Narrows people in their fight against clear-cut logging by writing letters to Weyerhaeuser or the Ontario government. Or you can invite students and their families to get involved in their marches for clean water, free of mercury poisoning. Another thing you can do is allow students to self-assess and peer evaluate as much as possible. Doing so will demonstrate your trust in them to be responsible for and to take charge of their own learning. In other words, take a backseat approach in the classroom as much as possible. Try to organize your learners in such a way that you become more of a guide instead of that sage on stage. Also try to have as much of your learning as you can be project-based. Education research has shown that project-based learning can increase retention of content and improve students' attitudes towards learning. It also promotes deep and relational learning, both of which facilitate meaning-making for the student. Let critical thinking and teaching for justice be the pillars of your pedagogy. Welcome nonconformity. Learn to see the past as present. History, represented in a linear trajectory, is a Eurocentric construct that further distances us from our past, making it challenging to ascertain the continuity of justice, how oppressive conditions in the lives that people live are alike over time. History represented linearly also further distances us from our future, again, making relational thinking and perceiving more difficult. Basically, under a linear concept of time, we are continually disengaged and cut off from our past and our future, which severely challenges us in the present to make ethical decisions based on what will be best for our human and non-human collective good. Another thing, make the goals of your students' learning those based on the lifelong learning values of the Anishinaabe peoples. Respect, love, courtesy, courage, honesty, wisdom, truth, and humility. Something else I think is very important is to envision yourself as and to be that co-creator of knowledge with your students. I previously mentioned that reciprocity in your relationships with your students is central. It's also respectful. Learning from them as they learn from you is key to decolonizing one's practices. Indigenize the 6 historical thinking concepts. In other words, bring the 6 concepts that remain in the realm of theory, after all they are thinking concepts, into action in the real world. Paulo Freire called it praxis. Get them to act on what they know so that they can make a difference in the world they inhabit. This is transformative learning. This becomes teaching for justice. In fact, I believe this is teaching justice. So that basically concludes my talk on decolonizing pedagogy and how I see teaching for decolonization. And I think just as some closing remarks before we move on to questions you might have from reading the handout or from just listening to what I've said, I would like to add that without teaching for justice, working for justice, or doing or enacting justice, both at the local and at the global level, Indigenous knowledges will eventually be wiped out. And when that happens, I think we will too. Without teaching for justice and modeling it in the classrooms so that students will know how to do it in real life, have a body memory of doing it, I don't really believe that we teach for empowerment. It's my contention that the Aboriginal perspective is all about empowerment. But the substantively different element is that this power is not at the expense of anyone or anything. It's not dependent on someone else's or something else's diminishment. It's not about power over, as it is manifest in mainstream society. It's about individual empowerment that seeks to raise up everyone around them. It's about individual worth being evaluated by the extent to which that person or that student contributes to the collective good. It's a space where there are no outsiders and where diversity is honored and in fact deemed necessary, especially if a healthy whole is to prevail. So I had a few other points, but I know that we're running out of time. We've only got about 20 minutes left, I believe. So now I think we can actually go on to some questions and maybe a possible explanation of Project Apart, or was there one more? Oh yeah, okay, I can come back to this actually at the end. Okay, so Jessica. I think I'm done.
All right, thank you, Sylvia. I know you wanted to show that that resource. I'm bringing it up now. Did we want to did you want to discuss what this is, and then we can do questions?
Yeah, I just thought I would have this handy for people, just so that you can kind of look at it. This is questions 1, 2, and 3. Here's 4, 5, and 6. 6 and 7, I guess we got here, and then 8, 9, and 10. How I start doing my workshops now when I'm with people, general learners, not just students, but the people from the community. If I go out and give workshops, generally what I tend to do is to give them pages, sheets like this, and then I let them read them over, and whatever it looks intriguing to them, or whatever kind of, if they have a bone to pick with me on something, they can take that question and then they can ask me. So I was sort of hoping that I could do that with you guys. If you just want to take a look at it, and if there's something you want a little bit more of an explanation on, then just go ahead and ask, okay? So I just turned back one thing here, just in case you haven't seen this. And then these are 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so if you don't have your sheets in front of you, you can just tell me, Sylvia, can you please move ahead or go back?
This resource is also available at the link I just recently posted in the chat. So if you wanted to bring it up on your computer, it is the last on the list for Sylvia's webinar, and it is Teaching Decolonization Toolkit, I believe. I will verify that.
Yeah, okay. I'm just reading some of your comments here, Christine. Sorry. I'm just reading some comments. Christine didn't learn or hear about residential schools until university. Yeah, that's a very, very common assertion. Idera, I only received instruction in social work. Genocide against Aboriginals was not even covered. Oh my, oh dear. Yes, we do have a long ways to go, don't we? Shameful. Here, I'll move on to the next one here just in case. Anybody have any questions? Now, I haven't even talked about Project of Heart, but you may have just sort of picked up from what I had to say that I'm quite attuned to the whole Indian residential school deficit in our curricula, and also I guess I can speak quite really from the heart about the power of students to help their teachers and to help adults start to really understand that that they want empowerment and they want to be able to make contributions that make a difference. Without my students who helped me with this and were pivotal to it, this project would have never gotten off the ground. And I'll tell you, it not only went off the ground, it is now covering the country. So I guess that really speaks to people's good hearts. When they know that there's something good out there, they can take it and run with it. Okay, I'm just going back to look at the questions now. Warren, how do you work with a school? Okay. Okay, that's a good one. I tell you, yes, our school didn't really. My Board of Education was very slow to come on board with this, if they came on board at all. So I worked outside, and I think maybe sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to go outside and find your allies in other schools, maybe in other school districts. I don't know if that answers your question, Warren, or not. Christine, I'm just looking at your question. When you are discussing active citizenship with students, what examples would you use that demonstrates how students can be effective? And examples of First Nations groups who have been effective. Well, I guess I guess in terms of examples, we just use our own students become those examples. For example, this previous, when I said we'd come back to this, let me put it up for you here. We've got kids who are going to be going. In fact, Warren McBride. Warren is a colleague of mine. He teaches at the same school, and he's going to be taking students out to the closing arguments at the Human Rights Tribunal for the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. So, our students, we can give examples, but they are the examples. And examples of First Nations groups who've been effective. Oh my goodness, when we have the Nishiyu Walk, these young people that go on these incredible journeys, and that is entirely driven with their spirits. And as we saw with the Nishiyu Walk, I mean, it galvanized almost the country. Everybody knew, everybody was excited about this, and the non-Indigenous population as well. Christine says, I work in an environment that's determined to stay non-partisan, not talking about it, essentially supporting colonial narrative. Yep, yeah, for sure. It's funny, eh? It's all, that argument is used a lot, right? We don't take sides. Well, I would say it's fair not to take sides when the playing field is level. If the playing field is level and you say you refuse to take sides, then we know whose side you're on. But again, when you're working in that environment, it is difficult. I think just being the model and always being that person that isn't, that they know doesn't really accept that is exemplary. I'm just keeping my eye here on the box. Adara, at our organization's annual symposium last year, Chief Robert Joseph presented alongside. Wow, very good. His message was profound and inspiring. He provided an immediate link for students to Aboriginal history and current events. Excellent. A number of students went. Isn't that, yes, that's, yeah. Yeah, and I think this is, we're going to be seeing this. We have seen it for quite a while, and we're going to see it more in the future. We are looking to people who can lead us, and we're finally, in the non-Indigenous world, we're beginning to acknowledge that the Indigenous elders, that the wisdom holders really have to be taken seriously. And I think this is such a welcome change. As the settlers begin to lose our arrogant approach, and that's what Eurocentrism does, right? Colonization leaves the colonizer an extremely arrogant person, or peoples as a whole, and you know, when we've discounted years and millennia of knowledge, and we're now finding out that, you know, maybe we better stop and listen. I found it quite interesting that when the ship from the Franklin expedition was found, Ian Mosby, I think he tweeted a few really good pieces of information. He said the Inuit knew that, you know, the day it went down, and you know, that wasn't hidden knowledge. But you know, so these kinds of things, if we just start taking them seriously. Okay, I'm looking back at the. Graham says, how do you develop? Sorry, how do you develop relationships with people in First Nation communities? Well, there are. I guess I develop the relationships mostly through the solidarity work that I do. I belong to a number of different groups, and we have contacts in the communities, and I think it's the communities that call out and ask for help from the non-Indigenous communities to help their, especially in their resistance struggles. You know, I mean, around here we've got the Barrier Lake community, which is in Quebec, that have been to Ottawa a number of times. You know, trying to have some kind of control over their land that is continuously being clear cut, and you know, exploration happening on it that contravenes all of their rights. You know, so you get the personal connections that way when you're actively involved in their struggles, and when you see their struggles as part of your own. I think that's probably the best way to make those connections. Christine, it's great to see that people are starting to. Yes, yeah, yeah, Adara. Oh, that's great, Adara. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Yep, that's really wonderful. Once making those lateral connections, I think is really, really good. If we rely on our institutions that are hierarchically based, it is, sometimes it's a little bit difficult, but if we can reach out and sort of, I call it poking holes through the columns, through the silos, then we can start making some really authentic connections, and that's where a lot of the growth can happen. Jessica says, how can one learn what territory one's on, and how can they get in contact with elders in that area? Oh, that's a really, really good question. Well, you know, Google is your friend. I will say that for the first thing. There's lots of maps that you can go to that actually show what territory things are. I would say that getting in touch with elders in the area, one of the first things to do is get in touch with Indigenous organizations that are in your town or in your community, or the closest if you're in a rural area. For example, the friendship centers, they're invaluable. They've got the lists, I'll tell you. And as well, I don't know what other school boards in Canada have, but in Ontario, we have a First Nations, Métis and Inuit liaison at the board level. And if they're doing their job, they should have connections with the Indigenous people in in your area. Okay, and you know, just making those personal connections, having an honest curiosity, and being well-meaning. Indigenous people will always help you out, and just make sure you have that tobacco handy. Okay, tobacco is a great way to start a relationship. Yes, very good, Warren. Thank you for saying that. Yes, getting in touch with solidarity groups like Amnesty International, Mining Watch. What are some of our other? Kairos is another organization that does a lot of really good work, especially the Indigenous, the justice, the social justice part of Kairos, and they will know lots. We reached out to steering committees and things. Yeah, that's great, Jessica. Good. Yeah. So I don't know. Did anybody have any questions about the teaching for decolonization? I think we have about 7 minutes left. That's just kind of an overall sort of thing for people to look at and think, okay, yeah, this is kind of challenging, or maybe this is not so challenging, but I can understand how, you know, there are so many missing and murdered Aboriginal women, and they don't seem to care about them. There is a connection to land there, right? Like exploitation of land. What you do when you take from the land, you relocate the people, and dislocate people, and you know, women are the carriers of culture. They're the land-based culture. So that's why, you know, I think that the environmental movement and justice movements for Indigenous peoples are really finding a lot of common ground together because of that indelible link between the, you know, the saving the earth and trying to stop its exploitation. Yeah. Have you ever faced backlash from students or teachers, and how do you respond? You know, I think, no, I haven't really received much from students. The school that I teach at is a school where we really do work with the students who have fallen through the cracks in the regular system. So a lot of those students know what marginalization feels like. Many of them have had far too much trouble for their years. And if anything, there's a very ready acceptance. And I guess I'm very blessed that way, if I can use that word, that I teach in an environment where the students are extremely accepting. Now, one thing that we do find sometimes is that they will come back from home and where maybe these ideas haven't been quite as well received, maybe from, you know, parents or grandparents or whatever. And, you know, that when I hear that, that's when I know that this teaching for decolonization is doing its work. Because what it does is it brings the skeletons out of the closet. If they were in the closet, sometimes they're not. It's right out there. But our students have been really, really good. Most of the teachers have been fairly accepting, but, you know, again, I think in my growth in this area, and having taken a lot of Native Studies courses at university, I guess I just don't have quite the respect for authority that I used to have, and so it's easier for me to speak my mind about things. If a person isn't conscientized, that's again another word from Puala Frera, but if your awareness hasn't been raised, this is all really new stuff for people, and it's going to make them feel uncomfortable. So I think if you want the truth and you really are going to try hard to get at the truth, you will go out of those comfort zones. You'll go into the places where feeling uncomfortable just seems like the right thing to do. So, a backlash might not be the right word, but some kind of strong negative reaction to you teaching this. You know, I think what I've noticed probably the most is just, especially when from the higher ups, I get probably just a non-recognition. I think that might just be it. I think it's because there's a fear of what do you do with this person? You know, she's coming up with stuff I don't understand. And I think we've all been taught that what you're learning has to come from above. It has to be authorized by someone. You know, we learn we live in these hierarchies, right? So when someone who isn't above you comes up with an idea, or God forbid your students come up with it from an idea, and God forbid they be the marginalized students, you know, the ones who have not been successful in regular school, well, you know, that kind of turns their world on its head. And I understand why there isn't the support there that one would like. Does it make it right? No, it doesn't. Never. It never does. But is it understandable? Yes, it's understandable. I don't know, did that sort of help to answer that question? I think more or less they kind of just leave you alone. Winning the Governor General's Award does have a certain cachet, so I think I'm pretty safe.
Thank you, Sylvia. Is there any more follow-up questions from the 5 participants we have left? Sylvia, do you perhaps have an email that our participants can contact you at with questions later on? Would you mind typing it in the chat bar?
Yes, it's the easiest email in the world. Oh dear, I guess I better get in the box. Here we go. Oh.
So understandable, Graham. Sorry, what was that, Sylvia?
info@projectofheart.ca. So very easy.
Okay. I'll get it in there for you.
Oh, thank you. I'm just reading some of the remarks. Thank you so much.
No problem. info@projectofheart.ca, correct?
That's it.
All right. Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you, Sylvia, for your presentation. Like I said, I will be sending around a survey about this webinar, so you can tell me your thoughts, comments, and concerns, and then hopefully I'll be able to address them for the next webinar, which reminds me to remind you to watch your email boxes as I organize the next one for November and December. And again, think about the theme, historical venues. And if you have any ideas or things that you think should be addressed, let me know, and we can work together to see how they can fit into webinars in 2015.
And Jessica?
Yes, Sylvia.
Can I just one thing, I forgot to go back to the Human Rights Tribunal. If there's any of you out there, this is the last week. The closing arguments are being heard right now. If you can, if you want to support First Nations children, there's a Twitter handle that I've given you. It's number and then witness for First Nations kids. Take a picture of yourself holding a sign and tweet it. And Cindy Blackstock, the executive director, would love to take these. She puts them up on the website. And we just need all of our collective spirits and our hearts in here, hoping that we get some justice, some equity for First Nations children. Okay, that's my spiel.
And that will wrap us up tonight. Thanks again, everybody. And thanks, Warren, for sending that link.
Bye-bye.
Good night.